In this session, we are going to discuss about buoyancy. Let's start the discussion. Buoyancy is the floating capacity of an object. If an object can float on the surface of water, we can say that it is having buoyancy. Some objects float on water. Why? We are going to discuss the reason of this floating capacity. Let's start the discussion. We are considering a bottle. This bottle is floating on the surface of water. On this bottle there are certain forces acting on. There is an upthrust. When we are dipping, when we are trying to immerse an object inside the water, there will be an upward force. It is known as upthrust. And obviously there will be a weight. The weight of the bottle is opposing the upthrust. If these two forces are equal, then it can float. When the weight is balancing upthrust, that bottle can float. The upward force exerted by the water on the bottle is known as upthrust or buoyant force. So this upthrust is also known as buoyant force. When we are dipping any object inside the water, there will be upthrust or buoyant force. This buoyant force is balanced by weight. Then that object will float on the surface of water. The magnitude of this buoyant force depends on the density of fluid. If the fluid is having more density, the buoyant force will be more. If the fluid is having less density, the buoyant force will be less. What is density? Density is the mass per volume, right? Buoyancy will increase with increase in density of liquid. We are going to consider two objects. One is a nail and one is a ball. And we are dipping the nail inside the water. It is going to sink inside the water, right? But the ball is going to float. What is the reason? The reason for floating is the upward force and the weight. If these two forces are, if the buoyant force or upward force and the weight of that object is balancing each other, it will float. So in this case of nail, it is not balancing each other. The weight is more. If the weight is more, it is going to sink inside the water. But in the case of ball, the upthrust and the weight of the ball is balancing each other, so it can float. The nail sinks. The force due to the gravitational attraction of Earth on the iron nail pulls it downwards. It means weight. There is an upthrust of water on the nail which pushes it upward, but the downward force is acting on the nail is greater than the upthrust of water on the nail. Here it is saying that the weight is more than the upthrust. The gravitational force is weight. The weight is more than upthrust. Because of that, the nail is sinking. But in the case of ball, the weight and upthrust are balancing each other. The ball floats because of less density compared to water. Upthrust will be more.